All right, welcome to the post-2015 MenEngage advocacy briefing. With us today, we have representatives from UN Women, someone from Sankey Gender Justice, and myself from the MenEngage Global Secretariat. We're going to start off with Julian and Sylvia from UN Women discussing the post-2015 process, the role that civil society plays in that process, and specifically what MenEngage can do to be involved specifically on the country level. So I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia for her remarks, and then we'll go to Julian.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'll give a quick overview of how the process has evolved so far. As you know, the Rio conference in 2012 decided that the General Assembly should set up an open working group of 30 members with the goal to develop a proposal of sustainable development goals. And the open working group should prepare a report to the General Assembly by September of this year. It then took a long time for member states to agree on how to constitute the open working group. There are 30 seats, but many of the seats are taken by several member states. So there are actually 70 members involved and inform with some member states, 3 countries joining 1 seat or 4 countries joining 1 seat. The open working group started doing its work in January of last year and engaged in a long period of stock taking. They discussed about 27 issues, from poverty eradication, conceptual issues, macroeconomic policies, education, health, gender equality, peaceful societies, urbanization. And they concluded they did this process by inviting expert speakers. The UN system provided issues briefs on every topic that was discussed. And then the group concluded its stock-taking period in February of this year, and then started in March. Sorry, I had to think for a moment what comes after February. A decision-making process. The co-chairs of the open working group presented papers for discussion. They are not calling the issues goals yet, they are calling them focus areas. And so over the last 3 sessions, the open working group has discussed between originally 19 focus areas. They were then dwindled down to 16. And in the last session, they have discussed a lot of the target areas that have been presented in each issue. There's great consensus on issues such as poverty eradication, food security, water and sanitation, health and population dynamics, education and gender equality. There's much less consensus on issues such as means of implementation, which includes financing issues, capacity building, transfer of technology, global partnership. Much less consensus on whether there should be even a goal on peaceful society, rule of law and governance. There are also discussion how to address climate change. There's a strong sense that climate change should be addressed, but others arguing there's a separate process in the UNFCCC, and that process should have precedence. So far, the member states haven't negotiated in those meetings, but really have exchanged views and preferences on specific areas. The co-chairs were supposed to issue a new working document, the so-called zero draft, last week, but they are delayed, which means they're arguing among themselves or also trying to address some of the contentious issues ahead of the next session. The next session will be in the middle of June, preceded by 3 days of informal consultation, which really means just giving them more time to discuss. And then there's, according to the current plan, a final session in the middle of July, where the Open Working Group is concluding its work. And the goal is to submit a report in early September. Now, the report could take different forms. They could submit a set of goals on which they have achieved full consensus, or they could submit a report where some areas are fully agreed and other areas are listed but marked as they're still open, they're still contentious issues that haven't been resolved. During this whole period, the major groups, which is a constituency-based set of arrangements that were agreed at the first Rio conference, have been very active. And the co-chairs have invited regular exchange with them, so that was an important space for civil society to contribute to the process. We have worked very closely, obviously, with the women's major groups, but there are other groups such as youth and children, science, local government, NGOs. They do joint statements, they do statements by constituency. And this has been an important process for civil society to contribute. So if you, I'm sure you have looked into this already, to work with the different major groups to contribute to the Open Working Group. And of course, in addition to that, there are lots of opportunities for those who are able to come to the sessions to engage with member states, but also to talk with experts at the country level on the particular issues you're trying to influence. What will happen after the Open Working Group is at this stage not totally clear yet. The Secretary General has been asked to prepare a so-called synthesis report, which is supposed to bring together proposals by coming out of different processes. The high-level panel that presented its report last year, obviously the outcome of the Open Working Group. There's also an intergovernmental committee of experts on sustainable development financing, which will also come out with a report by September. So all these, plus there have been thematic and country-level led consultations run by the UN system that have come out with lots of proposals. So the idea is that this synthesis report will bring all the strands of discussions together before the General Assembly will engage in discussing what is called the post-2015 development agenda, which supposedly will bring in the work of the Open Working Group and the Sustainable Development Goals, with the end goal of having a big summit in September 2015. And member states are currently discussing modalities for this summit, where the post-2015 agenda will be adopted. And to make things a bit more complicated, there are additional discussions going on about a conference on financing for development, a follow-up to the Monterey and Doha conferences. And the discussions right now are whether this conference should happen in 2015, before the summit or in 2016 after the summit. So this is a quick overview. I'll hand over to Julien, and I hope I've been clear. Let us know any questions for clarification.
Thanks, Sylvia. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the goal, the gender equality goal itself, and its content. Because as Sylvia said, so anyway, as Sylvia said, we can see that there is some consensus emerging around what is now called a focus area on gender equality and women's empowerment. There were lots of discussions on how to phrase it, whether it should include human rights of women in it, etc., etc. But it seems that the consensus now is moving towards having it a focused area on gender equality and women's empowerment, phrased like this. And in the last two sessions, there have been discussions on the specific targets that would constitute this gender equality goal. And so the proposals that that have been put forward by the co-chairs of the Open Working Group are, I mean, you can find it all on the website in detail, but just to recall, a target on ending discrimination in laws, policies, and practices, a target on ending violence against women and girls, a target on equal access to productive assets and natural resources like land, housing, financial services, equality between women and men in inheritance, a target on ending child, early and forced marriage, a target on recognizing, reducing, redistributing unpaid care work, and a target on sexual and reproductive health and rights. So, sorry? Oh yeah, right. Then there is also a target on education and a target on employment. Now, of course, I mean, it's still early to say which targets, you know, will be kept, but some of them enjoy a lot more consensus than others. For example, ending violence against women and girls, except for maybe one or two delegations, yeah, which, you know, made statements saying they were not so sure, you know, how was that linked to sustainable development. There is a really strong support. Now there are a number of targets which enjoy less support, and some of them is more a question of how it's phrased. So there is also the discussion now as to whether the Open Working Group will start negotiating the text. So actually going, you know, like word by word, line by line, and saying, oh, we want this word, we don't want ending, we want eliminating, etc., etc. Or if it will continue to just have a general discussion, which is what they have done until now. So there has been no negotiation until now. It was always just a general discussion, and then the co-chairs were encapsulating these discussions into a new draft of what they call the working document, which was presented at the next session. So that's a question mark. But in any case, so some targets, it's an issue of language, but other targets, it's also a conceptual issue. And here I'd like to flag two in particular, which are very relevant to, I think, MenEngage and your advocacy. The first one is the target on unpaid care work. And there is a really lack of understanding as to what recognizing, reducing, and redistributing unpaid care work means among the delegations. We even had one person, I'm not going to say who, mentioning, oh, does that mean buying more washing machines? So, I mean, and there are all kinds of jokes around this unpaid care work, and also not jokes. I mean, delegations from both developing and developed countries raising questions as to how is that done in practice. So we at UN Women have spent a lot of time doing some outreach to member states, trying to explain, trying to provide technical briefs, etc., etc. But we also need, you know, more voices to come up and explain why this is so important. And I think it's a really good angle for MenEngage because, of course, unpaid care work is also about redistribution between men and women in the family, in the households, etc. So. That's the first one. The second one as you can imagine, is sexual and reproductive health and rights. And here again, there is a question of, you know, phrasing, how it will be phrased, because some delegations don't want to have any reference to sexual rights, direct or indirect. So talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights is a no-go. But even sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights is being contested by several groups of delegations. So here again, I think it's very important to show, you know, to really explain why this is essential and why a gender equality goal that does not have a reference to sexual and reproductive health and rights is incomplete. There is also the issue that it's both the reference to sexual and reproductive health and rights is contained both in the focus area on gender equality, but also in the focus area on health. And many delegations say, well, then it should be only in one place. Our position as UN Women has been that we would be in support of having it in both places because they have a different, how can I say, angle in each of the focus areas. And we know that sexual and reproductive health and rights is absolutely essential to the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment, and therefore, you know, needs to be in the focus area on gender equality. So I think again for MenEngage, it's very important to make the point that this is not just about women; it's also about men. It's about gender relations in general, and therefore, you know, it's essential that it's kept in the text. And finally, my last point is just to also highlight the importance of mainstreaming, because we have put a lot of emphasis on, you know, making sure that there is a focus area on gender equality, making sure there is a gender equality goal. I think we are there, and yes, there are discussions on the targets. However, the missing link really is the mainstreaming in the other areas. And so that's why it's very important to look again at the next working document from the co-chairs, and to look in the other focus areas. What are gender equality perspectives? How do we integrate, you know, gender equality in the other areas? There is a goal on energy. I mean, if there is a goal on water, clearly there are some very important gender perspectives there that need to be captured. So that's something we are also going to be putting a lot more attention on in the coming weeks and months. But it's also great if MenEngage in your advocacy can emphasize the importance of looking at other areas as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview and perspective, and it's really good to get a sense of where we are in the process and what issues are where we can have the most influence. And so I know that you all are having some technical difficulties with hearing, so I'll let you all drop off the call, but thank you so much for being here, and we certainly appreciate it, and we'll be in touch in the coming weeks as we try and do more engagement on the country level.
Thank you so much from me as well.
Great, thank you very much, and we'll watch the whole hangout afterwards.
Yeah. All right, sounds good.
We can both afford a headset.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, bye.
All right, so next on our agenda, I'll be walking through some of the highlights from the post-2015 guidance document that Hannah was the lead author on. I'll also invite Hannah if she has any clarifications or comments while I'm talking, since a lot of this she had the lead on. Happy for her to do that as well. So I want to start with kind of a perspective on why this is so important for us to be engaged in. Obviously, you know, the work that our network does is complex, and there's a lot of programmatic interventions going on, and our attention is pulled in a lot of different directions, and so I'm sure some member organizations might ask, why should we be involved in this process? Like, what does this do for us, for our mission? You know, why should this be not only a MenEngage global priority, but a country priority and a member priority as well? And there are a few different reasons for that. One is that whatever ends up being this next sustainable development agenda will set the priorities for aid and country aid and donor funding for the foreseeable future. If you look at the Millennium Development Goals and the targets that were set with regards to girls' education, and then look at how much the funding for programs that encouraged girls' education and bolstered that area increased during that time, it's really easy to see that it's incredibly important to influence this, to make sure that it includes engaging men work, to make sure that it includes the issues that we're working on, so that we can continue to get the funding necessary to do the important work that we're doing on the ground. So there's that level of it. There's also, just in terms of national priorities when it comes to governments, I mean, yes, we can try and influence country governments and do that on an ongoing basis, but this is one of the rare opportunities to try and influence many country governments at once with the same message on our part. So in working to influence different members of the Open Working Group, we're really multiplying the reach that our network has in terms of influencing public policy and government priorities moving forward. And then with regards to policy also, this really frames the policy debate on the national, regional, and global level for the foreseeable future. The issues that are included in the Sustainable Development Agenda are going to be what the focal point or the focus areas are in the policy debate for years to come. It's going to be exceedingly difficult to get new items introduced into this debate once the agenda is set. So it's really critical that we're involved in this process now. And then so those are just kind of a few of the different reasons why this is so important for us to be involved in. And then in terms of what we actually want to do, like what we're actually trying to influence, what we would like to see, there are a few different issues. Julian touched on the standalone gender equality, women's rights, and women's empowerment goal, which looks as though it's going to happen now, which wasn't always set in stone. So, I mean, it's still not set in stone, but it's much, much closer to an actuality than it had been in previous months. So that's very exciting. But as he mentioned, the mainstreaming of gender equality, the gender equality and women's empowerment as a cross-cutting issue isn't as guaranteed. And if civil society doesn't keep up the pressure on member states and representatives to ensure that gender and women's empowerment is a factor across the board, then that's not going to happen, because certainly other parts of the civil society sector are going to be pushing, for their issues to be cross-cutting as well. And we just need to make sure that we're standing by women's rights organizations while they're pushing for that level of mainstreaming, that we're adding our voice, that we're being good allies, that we're ensuring that voice is loud enough to be heard by the member states in the Open Working Group. And then in terms of specific issues that we chose to emphasize, we have a document that's available on our website, or I'm happy to email out to regional coordinators again to circulate, that kind of talks through our priority areas in the post-2015 agenda, and then some suggested indicators for moving forward as well. So the areas that we're emphasizing are gender-based violence, caregiving, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. And as you heard Julian say, the gender-based violence element is not particularly controversial. It's widely accepted by member states as a priority. What we're going to need to do in that area more than anything else is just try and influence the indicators to make sure that the engaging men component isn't left out, to make sure that gender as relational is considered, because it isn't always, and making sure that that the lens through which the Open Working Group is viewing this issue is as complex as the issue is itself. And then in terms of caregiving, what we're emphasizing in that area is a 50% share of the unpaid care work in the household being taken by men, and the discussion that's going on with the Open Working Group doesn't quite go that far. Like, it says that women shouldn't have to do quite as much, but it doesn't always talk about that men should be doing more either. And so we need to make sure that that's part of the conversation and part of the debate. And again, there are specific indicators that I'm not going to run through now. They're available in that document. And then with sexual and reproductive health and rights, there are a few different issues that we emphasize. I mean, we're obviously, you know that we're building this initiative right now. Some of the key areas there are, women's access to safe and legal abortion, which is certainly something that's being debated in the development agenda. There's also, we're pushing for men taking a larger share of use of contraceptives, which there haven't been a lot of advances in different methods, contraceptive methods that put the onus on men. And if there is ever going to be funding for that, and if that's ever going to be a priority, it's going to be because contraception and men's role with contraception is emphasized in the Sustainable Development Agenda. So this is a good opportunity to do that as well. And so, like I said a couple times, there's a much more in-depth overview of these in the document that's available on our website. There are indicators laid out specifically so that for the advocacy work that you do on the country level, that you have those kind of talking points ready, those priorities ready for you, which you can obviously adapt as well. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And then in terms of like how we actually move forward in doing this, there are a few different mechanisms that Hannah highlighted in the guidance document. There's the fact that stakeholders, civil society stakeholders, can comment and provide input on position papers and also upload proposals online. If you look in that document that's been circulated, there are links in there that take you to the sites where you can contribute through online mechanisms. So that's kind of a low-hanging fruit. You don't have to do any kind of real outreach to governments in that instance. You're just, kind of having your voice heard on these issues, which is important. So I would definitely encourage members and regional networks and country networks to take an active role in doing that. But then there's the more like direct advocacy as well. And so the guidance document, has a list of the open working group and what countries are members. And we certainly have many of those countries represented in MenEngage. And so for those countries that are represented in MenEngage, you can start taking action now. You can find and contact the focal person for the open working group and find out how to provide inputs into that process. Like Julian said, there is a lack of understanding on some of these issues, specifically caregiving, probably also some of the SRHR issues. So if we can be a resource to these focal points, then it's not even about trying to sell them on anything at that point. It's giving them the content that we believe is important and allowing them to use that as a resource. So it's a little bit more subtle advocacy in that area. But you can also certainly have more targeted conversations with them on issues as well. And then the MenEngage post-2015 tool, for lack of a better word, is something that can easily be shared. We have a long form version of our post-2015 agenda, and then we also have a one-page document that streamlines it. Either or both can be shared with country representatives. There are also going to be national level consultations moving forward that haven't been set yet, that are going to be coordinated by UN country teams. This is something that Julian at UN Women is certainly willing to help us connect with UN officials on the ground. So we do have kind of an avenue into that conversation that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. And so we should really take advantage of these opportunities and be present in these dialogues, so that not only is the engaging men work not lost, but so that people see that we stand side by side with women's rights organizations and advocating for all of the same ends. And then there's also, in many countries, civil society organizations have already organized groups that are trying to work together to influence the agenda. Would definitely encourage you to find out if there's anything like that in your home country that you can take a part in. It's a lot easier to get your voice heard if it's part of a larger collective, and I think that in a lot of these cases we're going to be on the same page with some of these folks. So we don't want to be recreating the wheel. We don't want to be duplicating these efforts. We want to be amplifying the efforts that are already going on through the voices of our members. Connecting with UN Women and UNFPA country offices is also a good way to find out how best to be involved. We have contacts at obviously the global UN Women office and then the UNFPA office as well. So for those of you who are interested in having introductions made at your country offices, we can certainly help coordinate that at the global level. And then there are a couple other items that aren't specifically reaching out, contacting, and dialoguing with civil society groups and government officials. You can definitely put together a briefing paper that highlights your country priorities that's based on MenEngage documents, but has a country perspective from whether it's Uganda or India or wherever. Obviously, the priorities are going to be different. A lot of the indicators we're trying to push for are going to be the same, but we want you to make sure that your voice is authentic, and that's a good opportunity to do so. And there's also media advocacy that can happen. You can put together, honestly, I can help your country network do this or members do this. A media plan for doing outreach with local press, writing op-eds, being really proactive in the dialogue that goes on through the media in your country that is going to influence policymakers. And that's certainly an area in which we have a lot of room for growth, but that I'm more than willing to help any member organization or regional country network do if there's interest. And so I think that that's also another really good opportunity to influence the agenda and to make sure that we're taking the stands that we need to take on the issues that we care about. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, who's going to talk through some of the work that they've been doing in South Africa and Africa more broadly as kind of a case study or example of what this work can look like on the country level.
All right, thanks so much, Mark. Thank you. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to UN Women and to you, Mark, for organizing this. So yes, I'm supposed to just give a few examples of what we've been doing in South Africa and in the African region so far. And a lot of the examples that Mark used, we have actually tried to do. So here we go. So in South Africa, to start with our national work here, we've been engaging in the national, or trying to engage in the national process since the start of 2014, so this year. And from the start, we reached out to UN Women, to the office here in South Africa, and set up a meeting with the program manager that leads on this work to discuss what opportunities there are for civil society organizations to engage in the South African process. And the first thing that we did together with UN Women was to reach out to the government department in South Africa that is leading on this process, which is the Departments in Cooperation. And we asked for a meeting with their representatives to find out more about the national process and where they're at and how they see what they would like to, how they see civil society engaging in this process. And we found that they were very cooperative and informed us that they will hold stakeholder meetings and consultations from June this year, because we had an election here in South Africa in May, so they didn't for that election. But they did say that they wanted civil society inputs into the South African official position before the intergovernmental negotiations will start in September with the UN General Assembly. So at this meeting, just as Mark mentioned, we shared all of the tools that MenEngage has produced so far. So we highlighted in particular the MenEngage call for action and also the newly developed suggested targets. And all of the government representatives that were at this meeting expressed that this is a very, very useful tool, and they will bring it to the team, the negotiation team that will negotiate on behalf of South Africa in the negotiations. That was very positive. So we found that the tools that we have developed for MenEngage are very, very useful. So I would highly recommend everyone to try and get them in representatives. Then Sonke and UN Women also convened a session on the post-2015 process at our National Gender Summit, which took place here in South Africa in April, with the aim to inform other civil society organizations about this process, because we found that when we started to speak to other organizations about this process, to ask whether anyone is doing anything on this and if we could support that work that is already happening, we found that a lot of organizations didn't know anything about this process. So therefore, we thought that the National Gender Summit would be an excellent opportunity to talk more about this and basically just inform other organizations about this and the possibilities of engaging in this process. And we highlighted, just as Mark previously mentioned, the importance of why we should engage in this process on a national level. As a follow-up on both the Gender Summit and our meeting with the Foreign Ministry, we didn't want to wait for the government here in South Africa to call for a civil society consultation, so we actually called one ourselves. So we had a meeting here last week together with Oxfam, where we invited civil society organizations from different sectors, not only the gender sector, but also organizations from the environment sector and the education sector, etc. And we also invited representatives from different government departments and also UNDP and UN Women. Our aim was to more specifically ask the government how we can engage and influence the current position of South Africa ahead of these negotiations. And it was a very successful meeting in terms of the government representatives actually attending this meeting, and the same with UNDP and UN Women. And the Foreign Ministry actually gave us a draft of their current position as it looks now, and they encouraged us as civil society to give our inputs to this. So they actually gave us a space to comment on this document. So after this meeting, we decided that we will, as civil society, we will put together a briefing paper based on this position, and we will try and flesh it out a little bit in the different topics. So Sonke will, for example, take part in the sections on gender equality and women's empowerment and the health section, but then there will also be other parts such as environment and the education, like I mentioned before. So this is something that we're currently putting together with other civil society organizations, and we'll try and launch by the 1st of July. Just a few other things that came out of that meeting was that we had a civil society organization that is called African Monitor, which has been very active on the region when it comes to this process. They've been leading on the civil society working group in Africa on the post-2015 process. And they specifically highlighted that working as a collective is the most efficient way to go about this process. So in order to speak with a larger voice, they recommended us to work together as much as possible. They also mentioned a few suggestions of who to target when we do this advocacy. And the first one that they mentioned was Rwanda is going to be the next president of the UN General Assembly, so they're going to play a very critical September 2014 to September 2015. So they suggested that all different countries should try and contact the Ugandan embassy in their country and so on. So just do some advocacy towards the Ugandan representatives in your country. They also mentioned that every country going into these intergovernmental negotiations starting in September will have national lead negotiation teams. So they suggested that we should find out who is part of this negotiation team and then try and give them as much material as possible. Also to try and speak to your permanent representatives to the UN in New York, and also to your country. In South Africa, our presidency office will sit in the UN General Assembly session in September. So the other country representatives who will actually attend the General Assembly session in September should also be targeted. So those were a few highlights from that meeting. And then just a few, I don't want to talk forever, but just a few activities that we've done in the region. Last October, we attended the first African Union high-level panel on gender equality and women's empowerment in the context of post-MDGs. So Sonke, on behalf of the MenEngage Africa network, supported the organization of this event together with the African Union Commission, UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF. And the aim of this event was to generate African women's contribution to the African Common Position on the post-2015 development agenda. So I think tomorrow position will be launched, and so our aim was to try and influence this common position as much as possible before it was finalized, which was very, very hard, but at least this event where we had one of my colleagues, Bafana Kumalo, who was a panelist and spoke on engaging men as partners and ending violence against women in the post-2015 development agenda. And Itumaleng Kumanyana, another colleague of mine, and I also participated in drafting the declaration that came out of this high-level panel, which in the end had some language around engaging men and boys for gender equality. So we were very happy about that. Unfortunately, it didn't really make its way into the Common African Position, but at least we gave it a shot. Started talking to UN Women, the regional office of UN Women here in Africa, and they are going to be organizing a regional discussion before September this year, where they will talk about language, just as Julian mentioned now. They will talk more about language for the standalone goal on gender equality and women's empowerment, what that language will look like, and try and bring a civil society position on that language from specifically from Africa. Excuse me. And also another challenge that they will be discussing at this regional meeting is how to link the work in the different regions to what is actually happening in New York, because that up until now has been quite a big challenge. So there is currently a disconnection between the different regions and what is being represented and talked about in New York. So that is something that Sonke will try and participate in as well later this year. And also just a few things that we've done more on the international level to give inputs online to the different UN General Assembly high-level events, which is something that we've done to one of the events, which was called the Contributions of Women, the Young, and Civil Society to the Post-2015 Development Agenda. and this was held in March 2014. And what is really exciting is that when we've been speaking to UN Women and UNDP, the civil society contributions, or all the online contributions that are being made, are actually going into the background report for these high-level events. So your efforts will be, at least something will come out of your inputs to these online contributions. Also, just to say that there are different ways where you can keep yourself updated on this process. We have, for example, joined the Beyond 2015 campaign, which I think is listed in the advisory document, which is a global campaign, but they have different regional coordinators. So they do coordinate regional positions, regional press releases, and so on. And they give you updates of what is going on in your region. So it's very it's worth signing up for that campaign to keep yourself updated on what's happening. I've also signed up to a mailing list from the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I think that is also listed in the advisory document, and if not, then I'll ask Mark to email out the link to it, which is also very good because they send out all the dates for the open working group sessions and other high-level events that's going on, and so on. And just something short about what we're planning to do in the near future. We have just recently, actually last week, my colleagues were conducting country assessments of the different country networks here in Africa, and part of that assessment was to see what countries are involved in this process right now and what countries at least know about what is happening. And based on those assessments, we're going to choose a few countries to whom we're going to provide some more technical assistance so they can be more involved in this process in order to be able to work as a collective and speak with a larger voice. So that is something that we're going to do as soon as possible. I think that's it. I think my 10 minutes were over about 5 minutes ago. So yeah, that's all from me.
All right, well, thank you so much, Hannah. And just a general note to members who are watching this after it's aired, which is most people, while we weren't able to do a Q&A here today because of just the time differences and technical difficulties that many members had, we are available for answering questions and inquiries offline. Anyone who has any for me or Hannah or Julian or Sylvia can direct them to my email and I'll coordinate that. And just you can just send it to Mark, M-A-R-C, at menengage.org. With that, I just thank Hannah and the colleagues from UN Women so much for doing this, and Hannah particularly for being a lead author on the advisory document. Was certainly a major help to all of the rest of us. So thank you so much, and thanks for watching.